All right, so let's talk about your authors, the context of the stories, and what we're looking at in the stories. So first up, we're reading Edgar Allan Poe's The Cask of Amontillado, which we're reading for a narrator point of view. And we're also looking at the American Gothic tradition in that story. So Edgar Allan Poe is a mythic, massive literary influence on American literature, on pop culture today. He is one of the most famed and celebrated writers, and for good reason. He's writing in what we call the American Gothic tradition, and I want to talk about that for a minute. First of all, let's separate this notion of Gothic or goth that we know to be today as like an aesthetic. Let's separate that from Gothic literature because they're related but very different. Traditional Gothic literature started in England in about the 1600s, 1700s, and these were stories that, these are sort of like the original version of the horror story. These stories dealt with fear or with anxiety. They dealt with violence. They dealt with grotesque, gross things. And the original Gothic tradition used the world around them and the history of the world around them in a lot of ways to do that. So they had, think of Europe, they had these castles that had been there for centuries and, lots of opportunities for ghosts and folk tales and things like that. That's what they were using to build the Gothic tradition. Frankenstein is a classic example. Now, that tradition made its way to the States in about the 18th century. However, we did not have all of that history and tradition at that time to build those Gothic stories on. So we differentiate our tradition in the Gothic literary world as the American Gothic tradition. And that's what Poe is an absolute master at. So the American Gothic tradition still involves these stories of horror and fear and anxiety, manipulation, etc. But instead of focusing on the world around us as the sort of evil part of the story, American Gothic literature focuses on the psychological elements of it, and it focuses on people. So in traditional Gothic literature, you have monsters, you have things like that. In American Gothic literature, the monsters are people just like you and I, and that's the way that we differentiate between the two. And Poe loves this style of writing, and he's great at it. Most of Poe's characters are psychologically very complex. And that is true in the story you're reading this week. That's something to keep in mind is the concept of that sort of psychological evil or monster, and how Poe portrays that through the point of view he chooses in that story.